Hi, everybody. Welcome to 55's webinar on Universal Analytics versus Google Analytics 4. Today, we're going to be talking about the 4 key differences all digital marketers need to know, diving into the benefits of GA4 and the advantages that the new tool brings versus Universal Analytics. So I am very proud to introduce our Google Marketing Platform experts here at 55. This is a global panel. We have representatives from both the United States and the United Kingdom. First, I will introduce Sean Ozair, who is an innovation consultant for 55 UK. We've also got Robert Tracy, who is an analytics specialist for 55 US, and Rico Dittrich, who is a project lead and the privacy ambassador for 55 US. And I will let these 3 take it away.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Spot on pronunciation of my name, so kudos there. I've been working with 55 for the past 6 years and in the web analytics area and adjacent in the past 10 years or so. So I've seen many iterations of Google Analytics itself and many other analytics tools. So it is quite exciting times, and I'm very happy to speak about the latest version here, GA4, and I'm here with 2 amazing people. So I'll give it to Robert to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Tracy. I've been with 55 for close to a year. I help clients develop KPI frameworks and actionable interactions on websites and translate this into data layers and GTM to get data into GA4. Can pass it on to Rico.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Rico. I am a project lead with 55 for a little bit more than a year. And I have about 7+ years of experience working with Google Analytics, Google Tag Manager, Google Ads, Display, and Video 360. So really, Google Marketing Platform is close to heart. And at 55, I am responsible for about 5-6 very different clients from different industries and bringing the magic of Google Analytics 360 to them, especially with a focus on migrating to GA4, which is a great segue for today's agenda. We will be splitting today's session into these 4 units. Number 1, set the stage. What happened with Universal Analytics and why we're here? Why is Universal Analytics being sunset, and an increased focus on new solutions, including GA4. Right after that, how to get started with GA4. If you haven't, today will be a good learning session. And then
the 3rd section will be the longest and the section that we will spend a lot of time on, leading you through the interface and really pointing out the differences between Universal Analytics and GA4. We'll introduce you to a few concepts that are different in theory, and then in practice, we'll take you through the user interface to really showcase some of the differences and familiarize yourselves with the interface of GA4. Last but not least, we'll wrap it up. We give a little bit of an outlook of where the Google Marketing Platform Suite is heading, with a focus on Google Analytics, of course. And as Nancy mentioned at the beginning, there will probably be some time to do some Q&A, so feel free to pop in any questions you might have. Moving on to our first agenda item for today. All right, so why are we where we are right now? So Google has decided a few years ago to overhaul their digital analytics solution, known as Universal Analytics. The last library that Google had launched was analytics.js, I want to say in 2013. So it's been almost 10 years since the backbone of the digital analytics solution that Google offers to clients, small, medium enterprise, has been fundamentally renewed and updated to industry standards, to technical and technological changes, as well as legislation. So There's three aspects to this really. One is privacy legislation has been introduced, has been changed, and scrutiny in terms of data protection and privacy has increased significantly. So Google needs to stay on top of providing both business customers as well as end users with the tools to remain and stay compliant to their local and regional legislation. Number two is the industry and the different platforms and technology as well as devices that we use to browse the internet has changed significantly. And last but not least, there is changes in how user view the web, what their expectations are, and how they want to experience the internet. And we'll go over each of these 3 points in a bit more detail right now. So first and foremost, privacy legislation is very likely something that most of you are to a certain extent familiar with, because a lot of different geolocations have introduced privacy legislations, and no matter what type of business you manage or you operate, it is in one way or another very likely affected by data protection and privacy laws. 2018 was a tidal point for privacy legislation because the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, was introduced in Europe, and a CCPA was introduced in California that were at the time viewed as pioneering pieces of legislation protecting personally identifiable information, and set the ground for how data can be collected, stored, processed, repurposed on the internet. So 2018 was one of the important points in time that also affect, our digital analytics capabilities, our online advertising and marketing capabilities, and many more. And this is the starting point. Next year, 2023, will continue to strengthen consumer data protection laws, with the CPRA being introduced in California. And then there's also laws introduced in other states of the US, amongst them Virginia and Colorado. There's a couple more beyond those two, but these are very prominent examples of how ever more geolocations, be it countries, be it supranational organizations like the European Union, or federal laws like the US, are introducing new privacy legislation. If you're really into the industry news, you might be familiar that the House of Representatives in the United States is currently also discussing a bill on a federal piece of privacy legislation. So that'll be interesting to follow along the journey if and when that piece of legislation would come into effect, given its plan for a federal scope. And lastly, I want to also point out that these laws are good and they were great in 2018, but now their effects finally come to fruition. So, for example, in summer this year, I want to say in August, Sephora settled with the California Attorney General for $1.2 million because Sephora did not respect the stipulations of the CCPA, and it didn't succeed in following the stipulations within the grace period laid out in the CCPA. So there are real life consequences of not being compliant with privacy legislation. And as you'll see later, Google Analytics 4 gives us new and additional features to stay compliant with privacy legislation. Let's move on to developments in the industry and technology. Something that we're all probably been working to mitigate the impact on is the end of the third-party cookie. Apple, with its iOS and Safari updates, started the industry trend by introducing intelligent tracking prevention a few years ago by regularly limiting and restricting the lifetime, the quality, the capabilities of the third-party cookie more and more. By now, the third-party cookie is virtually non-existent and incapable in Safari as well as Mozilla Firefox. Google Chrome has announced they would deprecate or sunset the third-party cookie in the next I believe year and a half. 2024 is the year that they're currently working towards. So we need to prepare for a cookieless future sooner or later. And again, Google Analytics is a platform that relied significantly on cookies previously. Universal Analytics, when it was introduced about 10 years ago, relied exclusively on third-party cookies. When ITP was introduced by Apple, Google worked out a solution to rely more and more on first-party cookies, but even first-party cookies are being restricted more and more. So we need to keep that definitely in mind in preparation for the future. And the second point that I'd like to point out is, since 10, 15 years ago, smartphone adoption, as well as the adoption of other devices, be it desktop, tablet, or even other devices, has become more and more increasing. So while 10 years ago, not everyone used to have a smartphone and used to work with apps, these days we switch between so many devices, between browsers and different apps, that the user has become so scattered across multiple experiences that Google needed to address this challenge of focusing on the single user centricity, and being able to identify users as people and not just as cookies or IDs. And let's move on to the user experience as well as expectations. All of these points that I've mentioned so far go hand in hand. They're not disconnected, they're very much connected, and they've changed the way we view the internet experience, the digital experience as a whole. And because of both privacy legislation as well as different, public scandals, I would call them, and leaks of data, etc., that have come up in the media and in public discourse, end users want more choice, and they want to be informed better about what data can be collected and what the organizations end up doing with the data. And that is both on websites and apps. Suffice to say here, the Apple Tracking Transparency Framework, if you use an iOS device, you might have seen those pop-ups when you use an app for the first time to allow cross-app tracking. That's something that Apple introduced here as well to further restrict data usage and data transfer between apps on iOS devices, as one example. And end users have been moving in that direction more and more. Lastly, Universal Analytics, and this is a different user experience I'm referring to here. If you are a Google Analytics user already, you've seen that Universal Analytics has become slow and ever less responsive to the data that we feed it. It has a very nested architecture of how data is collected and how data is returned, and it's become slow, and it hasn't lived up to the needs and challenges that we need to address now in the 2020s, especially 2022 and going forward. So having said that, this is where we are at the moment, how Google Analytics has set us up in the past. And following suite, I'll pass it on to John.
Thanks, Rico. A very good summary to talk, to understand why GA4 and other kind of analytics suites are making the changes they're making. So as I said in the beginning, this is the first major change in the Google Analytics architecture. We have seen other versions in the past. We had classical analytics. We had Urchin before that. And then we had Universal Analytics somewhere around 2012 or 2013, which actually claimed it can get data from anywhere, which was true because it had this server-side API. So you could actually do app measurement, like kiosk measurement, TV measurement, anything you wanted. But those versions never actually successfully presented a joint framework across major mobile apps and websites it was pretty much just a continuation of a very website-first, website-specific measurement framework. And at that, it was a website-specific measurement framework of the 2000 and 2010s. Now, a lot of the websites are actually more like apps themselves. Actually, there's this progressive web app kind of conversation that's happening around. Long story short, websites don't behave as they used to. So the user interactions on websites aren't the same as they were 5-10 years ago. And the universal analytics architecture was designed to support use cases from 5, 10, 15 years ago. The architecture itself is actually 22 years old if you go all the way back to the Urchin days. So first major shift, we're going to talk a bit more in detail about how it is shifting exactly. I'm hoping most of our attendees already know things like focuses on events rather than sessions and so on. We'll try to give a bit more context to that. But before going there, let's take a step back and let's recognize the opportunity that this presents. Essentially, we were trying to use a specific framework that we are used to because it was the one that was available. And now we have something different that is technically a bit more compatible with a lot more use cases. So this is the right time to actually think about your measurement framework, well, your reporting practices, because there are some things that you're not going to be able to do in GA4 due to the different data model and schema that it has compared to UA. But there are some other things, some quite exciting stuff that you can actually do with the new model. But if you continue on just having the same report and migrate to GA4 with that mindset, you are not going to have a good time. So this is the right time to actually think about your measurement framework and your data collection practices in general. The other thing is that it is quite scary because how different it is, right? I think a lot of us, when we first saw GA4, app plus web, it's like original name. We kind of tinker around the interface and we couldn't do what we wanted to do. And then we kind of gave up on it because, you know, universal analytics were already there. It's a trusty, familiar environment. But now we have a definitive sunset. I know you heard news about Google pushing the sunset of universal analytics, but that's only for 360 clients. And most of you might be, but the majority of Google Analytics users are on the free tier. And the sunset for that tier is still July 2023, which is, you know, less than a year now. So if you're on the free tier and you still have not migrated to GA4, at least enabled a foundational basic data collection mechanism in GA4, which is just the page views, you're going to miss out on your foundational year-on-year reports, which is not a good place to be. Obviously, you can get data from one platform and the other platform and compare it that way, but that's just going to create headache for the migration. That's already problematic for use case and familiarity reasons. So one message that I will give is that you should do this immediately if you haven't done it already. Google makes it really easy to get started with GA4. They have this tutorial or setup guide, if you will, that is accessible in the Universal Analytics admin menu. So you can get set up with GA4's basic setup, just the page view tracking in a matter of minutes. Obviously, it's not enough. So the next step should be just thinking about your major conversions. Yes, you should rethink how you're tracking and how you're measuring, how you're reporting, but the main things you measure are going to stay more or less the same. If you're an e-commerce player, you're going to want to measure your purchases. If you're a lead gen player, you're going to want to measure your form submissions and signups and so on. So, and then fill in the blanks, just rethink your micro conversions and customer journeys. And because Google Analytics 4 is event driven and can actually accommodate a lot more flexible structure, that is where the fun bit starts. It will take a bit of work, but you will, if you do it right, you will find out that you can actually report on things that you were previously not able to. And that is because there is a significant change in the underlying architecture, as I talked about. So if we move to the next slide and talk about that change a bit, I think everyone has heard this. GA4 is based on Firebase, and Firebase is an event-first framework, an event-based framework. So what does this mean? Does this mean the sessions as a concept is disappearing? No, we still have sessions because it's a useful concept, You might have heard that Google was trying to kind of do away with sessions. Might be true, might be not, but they are here now because actually we do have sessions in websites, in apps, and it is a fundamental building block of multi-touch attribution as well. So the sessions are in GA4 and you can report in sessions. There is a metric called sessions, but it's evaluated entirely differently. And in my humble opinion, much more usefully. So because now Universal Analytics was obsessed, I mean, is still obsessed because it's still around, but with associating everything with a session and ensuring that across different reports, the number of sessions would always be the same and they would add up to this. Like you would just add number of sessions on a breakdown report and it would add up to your overall sessions that is reported in the summary section. This basically means a session can only have one traffic channel, a session can only have one landing page, a session can only have a set of like things that define it. In GA4, a session is only defined by the time differences across actions. So a session can actually have multiple traffic sources. And this makes things a bit complicated because this means if you now actually add sessions in a report that is broken down by certain dimensions, you are going to get a slightly different sum than when it was reported overall. And that might drive you crazy if you don't know the underlying reasons for it. But it is something that's by design, and it is by design so that it essentially opens the door for certain interesting use cases. For example, there were some taboo combinations of dimensions and metrics in Universal Analytics. You couldn't get sessions to a page. You would resort to like workaround metrics like unique page views or unique events for the event sibling of the page views. Now you can actually get sessions or users to any dimension you want. And under the hood, thanks to the more efficient and event-first bottom-up data model, GA4 is just going to do a quick count distinct, and it will actually show you the correct number of sessions. So we'll do in the demo, we'll touch on some of these, but this essentially opens up the possibility to rebuild some of your reports in a much more flexible way. You can just get your event names as your dimension, limit those event names to your main funnel reports or funnel steps, and get sessions in there so you can get a session level funnel report ready in minutes, which would take a laborious kind of implementation and reporting kind of configuration in Universal Analytics. The data layer structure is changing because essentially the data layer structure itself or the GTAG structure itself for UA, like UA itself, was kind of clunky and old. Currently, GA4 is able to piggyback on existing UA data layer. However, we expect new features, bring in new syntaxes and new configurations, and at some point, you will need to move to a GA1st data layer. So this is not a blocker now, and you don't have to do this now. If you are using GTM and you have a decent Universal Analytics connection, you can use the same data layer. The migration is pretty easy, and it's well documented by Google as well. However, there is a GA1st data layer kind of syntax that Google and partners like us are heavily recommending that you, before too late, migrate to, because you don't want to be in a legacy technical debt situation where 2 years later, this is going to be not top of your mind anymore, but you'll have to fix it because a new GA4 feature is not able to leverage the old data layer structure. So that's something to keep in mind, and to ensure that you maximize the value of GA4 for when the new features are coming in as well. So I gave some foreshadowing for the next section, but I'm going to now leave it to Rob to talk about some of the main differences in GA4, and then also a demo to talk about some of the things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, John. So we'll touch here on the 4 biggest differences between Universal and Google Analytics 4 that we wanted to highlight. Now that we have data being collected in GA4, you'll notice for your first time going into GA4 that the interface has a new look and feel to it. We can now customize our homepage in the built-in reports, changing bar charts to a line graph, changing out reports for some other unique looks into it. If you want to slice and dice your data in a certain way, GA4 has been enhanced with custom intelligence and machine learning. This is really best demonstrated through the insights feature, which can just kind of paint a window into some breakouts that you might not be aware of. And yeah, pretty insightful. Probably one of the bigger differences between the platforms is this shift from standard reports to Explorer. Google did this intentionally to kind of put the power of GA4 in your hands and as a business decide what's valuable for you to report on. Another cool feature is that we can now create events within the platform. The caveat being it has to be an event that's currently collecting data. So maybe you want to see a page view event just for when a user lands on your thank you page. We can bypass GTM and just do this within the platform itself. And probably the biggest change that most of us are aware of at this point is the deprecation of views. We now have data streams for app and web, as well as subproperties. Subproperties work well for if you have a GA4 property that's collecting data on many brands and you want to see a specific breakout of a brand, or maybe you want to see some specific breakouts regionally. Subproperties are a great use case for that. Next, and I'll just add some color to what John already mentioned in terms of data collection. We know there's different data models here, and GA4 is all about events and parameters. And this really had to change since we're collecting both app and web data. And with that said, GA4 really provides a better understanding of customer journeys and behavior across devices. As we know, more and more users may start browsing your website on mobile and then end up purchasing through desktop, and Google is able to kind of comprehend this better, that it's not a separate journey and that it's linked. And this is done through identity spaces, the identity spaces being device ID, user ID, and Google Signals to pick up that. Sessions have changed. In GA4, sessions are now powered by a session start event. And in UA, sessions were defined as a group of interactions within your website that takes place in a given time frame. Lastly, with data collection, Google's really tried to simplify the implementation with automatically collected events out of the box, like page views, scrolls, form interactions, and some other events. This is known as enhanced measurement. They also have lots of guide on recommended events, such as sign up, login, e-commerce, and some others with defined parameters and how these events should be built out. And of course, if between automatically collected events and recommended events, if this still doesn't meet your business needs, you can always create a custom event as well. Privacy first features really revolve around Google's consent mode. Consent mode is really comprised of two pieces. The first being that consent mode works with most consent management platforms and acts as sort of a relay between what your users are opting in for as far as consent, and basically sending that back to GTM so it can relay or fire the tags accordingly to the user's consent preferences. The second part of consent mode revolves around users opting out of consent, and it will send cookieless pings for these users and basically help kind of bridge the gap between the data loss on those users. And lastly, GA4 is kind of built to work better with the larger Google ecosystem. BigQuery is now available for all versions of GA4. Keep in mind, though, that the BigQuery data schema is a bit more granular than it was for UA. This means that we have to be careful with the queries we select, or it might be more expensive in terms of GCP costs. Attributions for GA4 are now available for DV360 in Google Ads. Audience integrations have been beefed up and are now available to all GA4 properties. Lastly, optimized reporting has been enhanced in GA4. We now have specific parameters for optimized, such as optimization or optimized personalization impression and experiment impression. And that really wraps up this slide, and we can now move on to the demo. Let's see. Okay, great. One second. Share. Alrighty. We're in the 55 GA4 platform here. As I touched on in the previous slides, GA4 has been enhanced with insights. There's a few different spots where we can pull insights from, being this little icon right here. And it basically has like a preloaded list of questions that you might be wondering about, such as how many users did I have last week, etc. We can also pull insights by the search tab and click here. And the top post name between this time frame is the landing page for 55, which is useful. And now we can see that the homepage is just really some baseline reporting on users and conversions, engagement time, where people are coming from. And the last spot we can find insights is in this section here, where it pulls some graphs together and whatnot, which can, uncover some insights you might not realize as a business. We can click in here, and then it has its own little insights hub. Next, we'll move on to the reporting section. So we'll go into real-time. Real-time reporting is really similar to UA as in terms of look and feel, just seeing what's been going on the website in the last 30 minutes or so. One new feature with real-time reporting is this user snapshot, which is a pretty neat feature. It can kind of almost give you like a real-time glance into like user's journey or interactions within your website. So that can be kind of cool just to visualize how things are happening or unfolding on your website. We'll go into the exact acquisition tab next. The acquisition overview is really your hub for like quick references and gives details about your users and where they're coming from. One new feature with GA4 is if we click on this pencil icon, we can actually change the cards. Cards would be reports, and kind of modify it and tailor it to your liking. We can remove cards, and Google has a bunch of like preloaded cards here you can select from. So you can really customize these built-in reports to like fit your individual business needs and whatnot. Once you select it, you just have to save, and then you'll successfully change your report. So back into here, acquisition. So as you can see, we have some more insights, which users are coming from channel grouping by country and whatnot. User acquisition reports really going to give you a bit more of a detailed report on where your users are coming from. And with the non-overview reports, we can customize these a little further. Maybe we don't like the line chart and we want to switch it to a bar chart. Just have to click in there and save, and then the report can be modified. If you want to switch like the primary dimension, we just have to click this little drop-down toggle, and maybe we want the first user medium, so we can change that. Secondary dimensions are right here when we just click into the little plus tab. Maybe we want first user source along with medium, bam, and it loads up. So yeah, you know, primary dimensions and secondary dimensions have not gone away, just kind of changed where they are. Traffic acquisition is really similar to the user acquisition report. The only difference is instead of users, we are now looking at data through the lens of sessions. Great. So now we can move on to the engagement tab.
Actually, before you do that, Rob, sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the main differences between UA and GA4 is just the difference in traffic dimensions as well. So I mean, I think we all noticed that you have something called first session in the user acquisition, but you have session channel group in the traffic acquisition, and that's just an example of GA4 trying to give you more with the data model that it has, whereas you would go to like the multi-channel funnel reports to be able to like get some insights with certain workarounds. Now you have specific dimensions for the first channel, and then you have and other dimensions for specific session channels, so you can understand which channels are driving are getting users to your website in the first place, and which are closing them right in these reports without going through like conversion paths or attribution models, so to speak. But it's something to be aware of. Like there are different traffic dimensions, and you need to use the right one to get the right insight. Otherwise, you will be surprised by the numbers you're getting.
Exactly. And with that said, we have session default channel grouping, first user default channel grouping, and of course, the standard default channel grouping as well. So kind of lots to choose from, and can get a little more granular with how you're reporting and analyzing data. Next, we'll go into the engagement hub. Kind of self-explanatory. Engagement's really going to show you how your users are engaging with the content on your website, as well as the events being logged, and if these events are converting as well. So in the overview report, a lot of reports on engagement time, views, how your pages are performing and whatnot. The events report is probably where I spend the most time. The events report just shows you all the events that are being logged and collected in your website. As you can see, we have a few events, and if you wanted to see a more granular breakdown of an event like page view, you can just click in here, and then we get a report specifically tailored around the page view event, which is really nice. Next is the conversions report, very similar to the events report. If you don't know, you can kind of think of conversions as like the UA equivalent to goals. So any event can become a conversion. You just have to mark it, and once you do, you will see your conversions in this report. Pages and screens really revolve around you know, how your pages are performing, just a more in-depth view we see here than what's in the engagement overview report. So yeah, this is a very important tab. Next, we'll move on to monetization, and I'll just highlight this quickly as 55 doesn't collect any e-commerce data, but the monetization overview report's really going to revolve around e-commerce data, your revenue, purchases, and items as well. But we can go into e-commerce purchases report to really get like a more granular view of how your items are performing and whatnot. So yeah, some really awesome reports here. Next, we're gonna dive into the Explore tab, as you might be spending quite some time building and analyzing some reports here. We wanted to demonstrate how to build a landing page report. And for the sake of time, I preloaded it with some dimensions and metrics, but I'll show you real quickly how we can just add these things into the report. So you just have to click on the plus icon, and then we're in here and shows you all the available dimensions we can use. And let's put views back in. I'll just deselect and select it. And then once it's turned on, we import and we have views in here. So to start seeing the visualization of your report, we just need to double click on the dimensions and metrics, and we will start populating some of the stuff. For the landing page report, we're going to use landing page and then some metrics such as views, sessions, total users, new users, and returning users. And we can see that the data is here. We can actually do more with these types of reports here, such as filters. Maybe we want to see a by first user default channel grouping. Oops, get rid of that. I think it's supposed to go in there. But basically, we just need to drop it down into the filters section and then select match type, contain, and then how about just organic search or something of that nature. And then we can even build segments around this report as well. Comes with some preloaded ones and some suggested ones as well. We'll just keep it simple and use a user segment, and we just need to add a condition, maybe like a geography one where we just want to see a certain breakout of the continent, and we can just add in, I don't know, how about Europe? Should work. Save and apply. And now we can see that the segment is in here. Just have to click it in there, and then once the segment loads up, we can see the pivot function here, where we can kind of slice and dice the data in some different ways to see the breakout. We could change the report type from table into one of these as well. And I had forgot to highlight with the Explorer feature, we have a bunch of different template types. I was just showing the freeform one. We can also use funnel exploration as well, maybe for seeing like checkout drop-off rate, path exploration for how a user gets to, you know, a certain event or conversion or whatnot. And then there's a bunch of others as well, but I would imagine majority of the time we'd probably stick to these three reports. Lastly, we just want to demo some things within the configure tab. I alluded to, you can now create events in the platform. We just have to click into this button, click here, create, and then really just add the conditions for what we want. So like event name equals page view, and then maybe add a condition where page title equals thank you or something like that to create your thank you homepage. And we can see all the events here that's currently being selected. This is where we can mark an event as a conversion just by clicking the toggle. And then we'll see our conversions in here as well. Next is the audience tab. Audiences, like I said, have been beefed up, and it's actually pretty neat. It comes with some suggested audiences. We can see here some templates to use. And then there's this predictive tab, which really revolves around e-commerce. So we're not eligible to use these, but some pretty neat features here. And of course, you can just always create your audience from scratch as well. Custom definitions tab. This is where we'll log all of our custom dimensions. As we can see, there's no more sort of ranking where, this is custom dimension 1. That's all gone away, which I think is actually kind of easier to work with. And then custom metrics. To create a new one, we just need to add the dimension name and parameter and click save. Lastly, the last item we want to touch on here for the demo is debug view. Debug view, I think, is like one of the best features of GA4. It really helps with troubleshooting, as basically you just need to activate it within GTM, add a parameter of debug view, set it to true, click preview, and then you can see in real time how Google is like logging all of your interactions that are taking place. So really helpful for troubleshooting. And yeah, that really ends the demo here. So I will stop sharing my screen.
I think it's worth talking about two things that are quite exciting to me, at least. I know it's a bit sad, but here we are. In the events and audiences sections, the ability to actually create new data collection elements from these audiences. For example, let's click on product A user and product B user, I guess, which is one of our audiences. And if we go to edit, there is an audience trigger option on the right. And what that does essentially is it creates a new event when this audience gets created. So let's say that you have a very complex audience definition and you want people to do something and do something else, but not do the other thing. And this would be really, really useful to actually have an event reporting so you can directly have a metric for it. Now, this feature enables you to have that without having a very complex data layer structure or GTM kind of workarounds. And same thing applies to events as well. You can create events from events. So you can have a combination of an event and a parameter and make that fire another event, which again, for if you want to, without going to GTM and without knowing JavaScript, which would be the previous requirement for something like this. So GA4 is introducing all these new data collection enrichments in the GA4 interface itself, which actually opens up a more advanced data collection possibilities for non-technical marketers and GA4 users. So one of the things I would advise our attendees to check is these two things and experiment with them, because they might prove quite useful.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, John. Last but not least, we wanted to give you a bit of an insight into what's next with Google Analytics, with the Google Marketing Platform. What can we expect? We've already discussed it. There is a deadline for the sunset of Universal Analytics. It's going to be summer 2023 for our free Google Analytics 3 properties, or Universal Analytics 3 properties. July 1st, 2023 will be the date that those properties will stop collecting data. So we really need to get all of our properties set up ASAP for GA4 to start collecting at least basic insights and data, so that we don't have a gap in terms of data collection. Even if you are on a 360 license and a 360 customer, your standard properties will still be affected. So if you have opted out certain properties from 360 service level, then make sure that those are either being replaced with GA4 properties or upgraded to 360 before the deadline to take advantage of the extension that 360 properties get until October 2024. So that gives us a little bit more time to set up the customized, sophisticated advanced tracking that lots of enterprise 360 customers have, and where 55 is really a great partner to help you do this. So if you are currently facing any challenges with Google Analytics 4 and need any assistance, support, or help, do feel free to reach out to any 55 representative, and we're happy to support and design an approach to really get you set up for the transition to GA4. Having said all that, Google Analytics 4 is at least immediately the future of digital analytics from a Google perspective. There's other competitors out there. If you're interested in learning more about competitors to Google Analytics, 55 is also happy to assist. We've been working across our multiple offices with competitive services as well. No matter why you decide to do that, be it for compliance reasons, be it for other reasons, we're happy to assist that process. And now with 4 minutes left, Nancy, I don't know if you want to handle the last few moments for any questions that we have. I already see that there were a few questions trickling in. I think 2 have already been answered. There's now a third one. Yeah, back to you, Nancy. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, all 3 of you. This was awesome. And to everybody online, we will be answering questions in the last 4 minutes, but this does conclude the presentation. I do encourage you to check out our blog, the Tea House. We do have some great GA4 content already up there and a lot of content to come as things evolve in the Google space, the privacy space, and the MarTech space. So the link is there. It will also be included in our follow-up from this webinar. Thanks everybody who joined. Jumping into questions, we do have one from Jeremy Adam. He asked, as GA4 doesn't include the custom channel grouping that we had for Universal Analytics, should we update our guidelines for UTM tracking for campaigns?
So I've had a few clients with that question because it's a very important call out. The channel grouping in Google Analytics 4 is different from the channel grouping in Universal Analytics, and that's with regards to the default channel grouping. And now there's no custom channel grouping to tailor it to our needs. So you're absolutely right. Google has on its roadmap for very soon, Q4 2022, the launch of custom channel groupings. So if giving out new guidance in terms of UTM parameters is a long trickle down process for you, I would advise against it, because Google is telling us that once custom channel groupings launch, they are also retroactively applied, which is a once in a lifetime opportunity. As you might know, in Universal Analytics, nothing ever happened retroactively. But for GA4 custom channel groupings, Google will help us apply your definitions retroactively. So I would potentially wait until they roll it out, and you will probably be lucky and see your custom channel grouping applied retroactively too.
Awesome. Thank you, Rico. I think we have time.
A quick tip there, Nancy, would be just Jeremy, you can use Data Studio if you want to create your own custom channel grouping for the time being. But as Rico said, don't update your UTMs, because that's probably a labor-intensive thing for you and for performance marketing team / agencies.
Awesome. Thank you. And we've got one more question. John answered this. I don't know if everybody's able to see it, so I'm going to do a live as well. But Rosie Butcher asked, could you talk a bit more about the new data layer structure? Is this just thinking about GA4's data structure when planning data layers, or is it the data layer itself fundamentally changing?
I don't know if my answers are visible by attendees or not, but let me summarize my answer, because I think that's a bit long. I'm making it longer by talking about it. So essentially, the data layer syntax itself is different in GA4. So we advise you to act fast and change your data layer structure. Although GA4 tags and GTM are able to piggyback on the legacy UA structure, we expect some new features coming in will not be compatible with it. And UA tags are compatible with GA4 first data layers as well. So there's no reason to really not do this change. You don't want to be in like 2 years time and have to deal with this then, instead of now, where you will probably get resources because GA4 is happening and top of mind for everybody.
Awesome, thank you. And we are at time. So again, thanks everybody for joining. If you do have any questions about web analytics, GA4, please feel free to reach out to 55. We have done, I think, over 250 plus GA4 implementations worldwide. So pretty great number, pretty excited to help usher all of our clients into the future of web analytics. And again, thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.